Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic, let's do it. What's an urban legend that you know to actually be true? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Raymond Ray Robinson, October 29, 1910 to June 11, 1985, was a severely disfigured man whose years of nighttime walks made him into a figure of urban legend in western Pennsylvania. Robinson was so badly injured in a childhood electrical accident that he could not go out in public without fear of creating a panic, so he went for long walks at night. Local tourists who would drive along his road in hopes of meeting him called him the Green Man or Charlie No-Face. They passed on tales about him to their children and grandchildren, and people raised on these tales are sometimes surprised to discover that he was a real person who was liked by his family and neighbors. The funhouse mummy. Elmer McCurdy was a bank and train robber killed in a shootout in 1911. His body was embalmed and put on display. It ended up going on tour, even being used in a couple of films. His body went missing in the 1960s. It turned up again in a funhouse that was going to be used for the filming of an episode of The $6 Million Man. The crew was removing mannequins when the arm fell off one of the mannequins and they noticed a bone sticking out. The police were called. McCurdy's body was buried in Guthrie, Oklahoma. In my college town, there was one homeless guy who everyone kind of knew of. He stood out because he always wore a black suit with no shirt and walked around barefoot with no baggage or shopping cart or anything. A rumor started going around that he was actually a famous painter whose work sold for thousands. Then he had a patron that took care of him. And he just lived like a vagrant out of preference and schizophrenia. Most people called bullshit, including myself, until I met someone that knew his name, William Laga. There used to be a rich hippie cult in the woods nearish my town in the 1960s. Ultra rich, but think drum circles and cocaine. So much cocaine. One day they just disappeared. Abandoned the compound, nobody knew why. They just all left overnight. Assumptions ranged from a drug raid incoming to a murder in the compound. You name it. Most don't think it was real anymore, or it was just some weirdo eccentric dude and the story took a life of its own. I know it's real because I've been to the compound. Noticed some, many years back, a weird road when driving past the area for work. Overgrown and not on Google Maps. Took my lunch piggy break right there, and then we went to check it out. The place was massive, with stables and several large houses now kind of caved in. Inside, everything was still like it was back then. Furniture, diningware, clothes, and magazines. Like someone had just left for the store. I mean, minus 30 plus years of mildew and moss. Not a single car in the garages, though. The Great Potato Salad Massacre back in 1976. Small Alabama town, middle of July, soaring temperatures, Southern Baptist Church summer picnic. Some husband put the potato salad in the back trunk the night before. He didn't know it needed to be refrigerated. At the picnic, he puts it on the food table, everyone eats it. These are Southern Baptists, after all. An hour later, the fuse was lit, so to speak. Nay, 100 fuses were lit. The men were playing softball, the women were trading pie recipes, the kids were swimming in the pond. Mayhem ensues. Gastro explosions erupt in every last one of those that ate the salad. The massacre is what happened in their britches, and to the outhouses, the lucky few got to use. Everyone else either decimated or desecrated the bushes, the trees, or their car seats, as they foolishly thought they could make it home in time. How did I know it's true? My grandpa is the man that was in charge of the potato salad. He didn't eat any, but my grandma reminds him all the time since they were excommunicated from the church. Have you heard the story of a robber who fell through the skylight, sued the homeowners, and won? It's true, but it was a business, and it wasn't a robber. It was a junkie jumping from one adjacent building to the next and landing on the skylight that gave way. He's lucky to be alive. He fell 2 stories. Also, the insurance company settled, so I wouldn't say he won a court case per se. It was my dad's family business. the construction clown in Cincinnati, Ohio. I lived in Roselawn and Bridgeton as a kid and started to hear stories from friends about a middle-aged man with a clown collar, rough, hard hat, clown suit, and a construction worker's metal toolbox riding the public transit all day without purpose or milling around construction sites. There's no way that's true, I thought, until one day I took a bus to the local Kroger grocery store for something. As I walked through the parking lot to the store, I saw him standing outside the front doors, toolbox in hand, hard hat, white ruffled collar, bright red sweatshirt, overalls, and work boots painted yellow. It was terrifying. I milled around the parking lot for what felt like forever, and noticed that most people coming and going from the store were avoiding the guy. He just stood there not moving in the middle of the entry-exit doors of that Kroger. Suddenly, though, he was gone. I didn't see if he walked away or got into a car or went inside, but I had lost my nerve completely and went back to the bus stop. As soon as I paid the fare and looked up to find a seat, there he was, just sitting in the middle of the bus. I realized the bus had also stopped right in front of the grocery store, so he must have gotten on there. Anyway, I sat one row back from him, and he didn't move or say a word until it was time for me to exit. I saw him again a few more times in the neighborhood, almost always in passing while he was riding the bus again or standing at various bus stops. He was always dressed in the red sweatshirt and overalls or a full-on clown suit. One time he had a shovel. Then one day he was just gone and people stopped talking about him. Probably 20 years later, when I was in my 30s, I was visiting home and running around the city with my mom. We ended up in Covington, Kentucky, doing something or other, and were stuck at a traffic light on MLK Boulevard. As we inched up the road, I looked over and saw a silver bust statue of the guy. It was in front of the Hellman Creative Center. I completely lost it. Nobody, including my mother, had ever believed me when I told stories of seeing this guy when I was a kid, but there's a fucking statue of him right there on the side of the road. Clancrest. Always thought talk of a KKK compound was typical small-town urban legend. I got into just exploring for a while and downloaded additional layers from the county's FTP server that showed defunct incorporations and historical plat maps. Very real. When I was a kid, all the other kids always told me to watch out for Uncle Jammu, meaning an old man who would snatch kids and do bad things to them. I used to think the name was made up and completely random and that no such man really existed. Well, it turns out there was a real-life pedophile murderer by that name who abducted 2 8-year-old girls, sad then, and burned their bodies to hide the evidence. The case was so brutal and shocking, it quickly gained national notoriety, and thus the name was coined. This was in Finland, by the way. Remember when they said E.T. on the Atari 2600 was so bad a game that it crashed the entire games industry, and then they took all the unsold cartridges to a New Mexico landfill? Well, that isn't true. The game is okay, just a little broken, but multiple factors led to the game industry crash. But one thing that is true is that they did find that landfill site several decades later with many E.T. cartridges, but also several other games that they later auctioned for charity. Look, I played that E.T. game as a kid and an Atari enthusiast. I just remember eating Reese's Pieces and using your neck to fly out of holes and just endlessly side scroll and never go anywhere. Game was trash. That's it. I probably played that for a week and it just sat there. Terrible game. Hope you never played it. This isn't a known urban legend per se, but once when I was 14 years old, I was staying at my grandma's. The house was surrounded on 3 sides by woods or forest. I was walking up to the back door when something caught my eye. Sitting on a fallen tree at the edge of the woods was a woodpecker that was at least 5 feet tall. It was legit Woody Woodpecker. I stared at it for a few seconds, then ran inside the house. Now what makes this better is about 10 years later, my stepdad and I were talking randomly about things, and the giant woodpecker came up. Before I could finish my story, he interrupted me and said he had seen a 5-foot woodpecker sitting in the same spot a couple years before. He thought he was crazy and never told anyone about it. So the legend of the 5-foot woodpecker was born. In Liverpool, kids are taught about Purple Aki from a young age. He's been locally known and feared for honestly 3 decades. He likes feeling boys' muscles and makes them do squats. He's completely real. He's even had court orders against him, preventing him from feeling people's muscles. I hope you get "ard" by Purple Aki is a common insult and a very real fear. I went to a university near Valley Forge, PA. It used to be a POW camp and a military hospital before the college bought the entire property for $1 in the 1960s. Since there are really only 3 universities near Valley Forge, it will not be hard to deduce which college it was, lol. Anyways, there was a rumor that underground tunnels and all sorts of stuff were left abandoned in the abandoned sections of the college. Sure enough, it was true. We found a tunnel hatch under our carpet in our dorm room. 2 hatches on the first floor, the furthest first floor dorm room of each building. It was literally like stepping into 1945. Everything was preserved down there, and the tunnels were massive. We eventually ended up in an underground garage where there were 4 Jeeps parked, but all the tires had dry rotted. We realized this was actually beneath our soccer field. Anyways, the tunnels led to the cafeteria, the admin building, every dorm, and then an old abandoned section of our campus that we had no way of entering topside. We soon realized this was the hospital or morgue. When we got out of the tunnels and walked the floor, it was still like 1945. All the hospital beds were still there. The surgical curtains were still there. Hell, even the tools like the scalpel, saw, pliers, etc. were still on their trays. It was like everyone all of a sudden up and left, and nothing had been moved since then. The morgue still had its slabs, and sometimes we would dare each other to slide in there for a period of time. But yeah, it was an urban legend on campus until 3 of us decided to risk expulsion to see if it was true. And it was. My dad is a genuine human, honest, etc. He swears on his life he saw Bigfoot in Washington State, USA about 25 years ago. He says if it wasn't Bigfoot, it was something he couldn't explain. My mom said he was genuinely spooked. The legend. A girl was shot from her bike because she didn't greet them properly. Half true, but not really. She did get shot, but it was technically an accident, yet it was entirely possible it was not. Let me explain. This was literally decades ago, and the myth was spun because it was a combination with many other horrendous crimes this family did. Murder, incest, or you name it. They killed a 2-year-old baby, burned down houses, smashed someone's head in, arred family members. It was insanity. Thankfully, the clan disbanded several years ago, so the girl drove by while they were doing some backyard shooting or training, and she got caught in the crossfire. So while the story is technically not true, at least the official version, I can only believe where it came from, and that it's not the only true entire crime story of this region or the worst. In the 1970s, there was a homeless man begging for change on the Vegas Strip. A high roller tossed him a $10 chip and walked away. The homeless man went into the casino and sat at a roulette table to place a bet. The dealer didn't want to deal with a homeless person, so he asked the pit boss to get rid of him. But the pit boss took pity on him and said he could really play until he lost, which he agreed to. Over an hour later, the pit boss came back to the table, surprised to see the homeless person was still there. And without looking at the table, he demanded to know why he was still there. The dealer simply said, "You said he could play till he lost a bet." He hasn't lost one yet. The pit boss looks at the table and is immediately shocked to see the enormous pile of chips that this homeless man has won. At this point, he had accumulated over $20,000, and he was still winning. The homeless man only left the table to use the bathroom and kept ordering food to be brought to the table as well as ordering top shelf liquors. He played through the whole night and never lost. It got to the point where the casino couldn't cover his bets. At that point, he finally stopped. When he got off the seat to collect his winnings, he suffered a massive heart attack and dropped dead before he could spend a dime. Roscoe the Suicidal Pekingese. I'm a retired law enforcement officer. I would get called to this lady's home because she heard noises or saw lights in the woods. We never found a thing. The lady had a Pekingese dog named Roscoe. Roscoe had issues in his life. Nice enough little guy, but he would try to throw things, or himself, down the steps, or he would leap on her couch and try death by cop. I'm convinced he needed lithium. He would leap at my neck and face. Finally, one night, Roscoe ran out the back door, and due to the fact he was on a leash that went from the back door to this tree, he tossed himself off the deck and strangled himself. I cut the leash as fast as I could, get my pocket knife out, but it was too late for Roscoe. I really think he just couldn't stand her. I saw a Bigfoot when I was around 6 in the deep backwoods of Maine. I was playing in my little Tyke's tent, the red one with the yellow and blue piping that has a telescope coming out the top, about 10 to 15 feet from the lake we had a camp on. I remember looking out of the kaleidoscope and seeing what I thought was a person swinging from branch to branch along the trees by the water. I thought it was weird, and I realized this person had arms longer than a normal human and had its legs curled up underneath it, almost like it was sitting Indian style. I just closed the telescope and sat down for a while, and then booked it back to my grandpa and great uncle, who were in the cabin. For context, too, this place and cabin was only reachable by a seaplane or a 30-minute boat ride. Cabins have no electricity, running water, etc. So it's not like someone could have just been out walking in an ape suit. It would have taken a lot of effort to pull that off, to scare someone, random 6-year-old. Black Volga. In the 60s and 70s, there existed an urban legend in Poland that vampires in black limousines were kidnapping people, preferably little children. It was a tale prepared and parents told their kids, who would then tell their friends, etc. Turns out it was a rumor that was spread by the Polish secret police, who actually used black cars to kidnap people. The aim was that no one would believe someone would report they had witnessed a kidnapping. The Subtropolis, the underground city. No one thought it was real until the 1970s. Now it still catches people off guard. Even people who have lived nearby their whole lives in Kansas City. There's a massive, mostly man-made cave system. It started as a government facility, and part of it remains guarded by the military to this day. Exact dates are still not known, but in 1947, it was sold to a mining company who, rather than collapse the whole thing and strip mine it, kept expanding it. In the 1960s, the Hunt family, billionaires from Texas Oil, and the owners of the Kansas City Chiefs, bought it and spent a decade developing it. In the 1970s, they started renting out warehouse and office space. These days, it's almost entirely warehousing, but there are some businesses that still operate out of it. You can go drive through it. I think it costs a few bucks. It's very easy to get lost down there. It's upsetting how far underground you can go. It's a very large facility, 1,100 acres. Midgetville. There was a rumored town made up entirely of little people with dwarfism, located somewhere in the woods in Northern Virginia. Former circus performers way back in the day, allegedly, and just any little person who wanted to live in a town specifically scaled for people of that stature later on. The rumor is, if you went there and weren't invited, they'd throw rocks at your car and chase you off because they obviously didn't want gawkers treating them like an attraction. Well, the small town actually existed. It's torn down now, but it existed when I was a kid. Also, it wasn't a town specifically for people with dwarfism. It was just a small little community hidden in the woods, an artist's retreat.